Hello, I'm Peter Mansbridge at Vimy Ridge in France. This is sacred ground for Canadians, the earth here stained with the blood of many of those who came before us. This monument remembers an epic battle of the First World War, a day when Canadian forces stormed this ridge, a strategic ridge, and took it from German soldiers. It was perhaps our greatest military victory, but it came at tremendous cost. More than 10,000 casualties, 4,000 of them dead. Here it is, Canada's most famous battlefield. 100 years later, the craters from the pounding of thousands of shells still clearly evident, still haunting the ground they tore apart. The Germans had captured this land in the early months of the First World War. France then lost tens of thousands of its soldiers trying to take it back. They never did. Instead, it was the Canadian Army that made that happen. In April of 1917, when for the first time Canadians fought as one army. It was, many say, the moment Canada became a nation. Over the next few minutes, we'll visit this spectacular monument. We'll go into the trenches, and we'll visit a World War I cemetery where many Canadians have their final resting place. But we start underground, in the tunnels that move Canadian soldiers to the front. Vimy Ridge, a place of Canadian history. While the battle would take place above ground, there was a whole different operation going on beneath the ground, here in the tunnels under Vimy Ridge. These tunnels look pretty good right now. All these years later, they're bigger, they're cleaner, they're drier, they're well lit. This is not what it looked like 100 years ago. In fact, back then, the tunnels were much smaller, dank, dirty, dark, muddy. There were rats here. This was not a good place to be. But Canadian soldiers were here on that night before the Battle of Vimy Ridge, getting ready. Soldiers like young Jack McClung. Recognize that name? McClung? His mother, Nellie McClung, was one of those women in Canada at the early part of that century that was fighting for women's rights. Well, on that night, Jack McClung wrote to his mother and said at 5:30 the next morning, he'd be going over the top to face action. And then he added this line. I want to read it to you to make sure you get his words exact, because they're pretty powerful when you think about it. This is what he said. I guess a fellow has more sensations and feelings in this short night than in his whole life. You can believe that. Imagine all these young Canadian kids getting ready to go over the top the next morning with no idea whether they'd still be alive at the end of the day. Let's carry on our tour here at the tunnels under Vimy Ridge. So the tunnels, they're home to the soldiers waiting to go on the attack, but they're also home for the officers who are planning the attack. Let me show you something. It's kind of interesting. Now, the first thing to realize about this room is none of the furniture is original. It's all been reconstructed to make it look like it did a century ago. But what's important is the room is from that time. And it was important because it gave the officers an opportunity to be able to plan at the front. For officers at the front, the war had been a dangerous business. A lot of them had died at the front, trying to sit down in the open and plan attacks. Here they had the opportunity to be underground and protected while that was going on. It made a big difference in leadership during that part of the war. These are the Canadian trenches. The German trenches, at some points, less than 50 meters away. For 4 years, this is what World War was like. Both sides dug in and barely moving, taking huge risks with terrible losses to capture short distances. With it all, extreme bravery on both sides. Let me tell you a story about the Canadians, about one particular soldier, Thane McDowell. He was from Ottawa. He was a captain. He led his men over the top, going out over the trenches, across no man's land toward the German lines. He left with 150 soldiers. When he got to the other side, he turned around, there were only 3 of them left. Yet he managed to convince the Germans he had a lot more with him, and they surrendered, and he found himself with 75 German prisoners. He was awarded the Victoria Cross, Canada's and the Commonwealth's highest medal for bravery. In these quiet woods, not far from where the fighting shattered this place 100 years ago, one of the many, many cemeteries that dot the French countryside. Here, 3,000 of Canada's Vimy Ridge fallen lie.
One of the things that strikes you when you read the names and the backgrounds of so many young men who died for Canada is their age. 21, 20, 27, 19, 42, 18, 19, 27, and 21. And then we come to Private J.G. Jameson, 87th Battalion, Canadian Infantry, died the 9th of April, 1917, day 1 of the Battle of Vimy Ridge, age 17. Private Jameson lied about his age. The legal age was 18 to join the Canadian Army. He died at age 17. Like a lot of young Canadians who felt they should be here fighting for Canada, for king and country. So they came here, and they died here, and now they lie here.
The fighting was so horrific throughout the war that in many cases the dead were never recovered, their bodies allowed to rot and slowly disappear into the craters where they had fallen. This stunning monument at Vimy Ridge was built to remember them all. The names that are engraved on this wall, and there are 11,285 of them, all Canadians who gave their lives in the Great War but whose final resting place is not known. Every one of these names obviously has a story behind it. I often look at this. Cyril Wendell and John Wendell, brothers. They belonged to the Alberta Regiment. They joined the Canadian Army on the same day, and they died on the same day. This is one of the most famous pictures of Canadian soldiers after the battle at Vimy. 2 truckloads, the first closest in the frame, showing the smiling faces of victory, a reaction perhaps prompted by the photographer. In the background, the second truckload, perhaps with expressions more telling. They had lost friends, touched the face of hell, and nothing would ever be the same again. Today, Vimy is a destination for remembrance. Almost 1 million visitors come here every year, gazing at the names on the wall. Many are students, some the same age as those whose names are now carved into the limestone, silent soldiers now. Yet 100 years later, they are not forgotten. Well, we hope you've enjoyed our special visit here to Vimy Ridge in France, a very special spot for Canadians, and for some in a very personal way, including me. My grandfather fought with Canadian troops here at Vimy Ridge. He was injured in the battle, evacuated to England, where he recovered. I'm Peter Mansbridge at Vimy Ridge. Thanks for watching.